Hey, Dana, thanks. This is a Fox News alert. At this hour, there's a manhunt underway for an illegal immigrant suspected of shooting and killing a California police officer this week. The murder happening as migrants are being released by the hundreds in the U.S. as immigration agents are overwhelmed by the influx of illegal immigrants. And the fight over funding a border wall keeps the government partially shut down for a sixth day. Good evening. I'm Brett Baer. The death of a young police officer comes at a critical stage in the fight over border security. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Correspondent Peter Zusi is on Capitol Hill to tell us if Congress is moving any closer to a deal. Correspondent Ellison Barber at the White House, where President Trump is tweeting about the Democrats' refusal to fund the wall. National correspondent William Lajeunesse reports on the influx of illegal immigrants at the border. But we begin with Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt and the breaking details on the death of a young police officer at the hands of an illegal immigrant. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening, Brett. 33-year-old Ranil Singh was gunned down at 1 a.m. Wednesday in the small town of Newman in Northern California. Just hours earlier, on Christmas Day, he had taken this photo with his wife, Anamika, and their 5-month-old son.
His 5-month-old, he will never hear talk. He will never see his son walk. He doesn't get to hold that little boy, hug his wife, say goodnight anymore because a coward took his life.
On Wednesday, Officer Singh pulled over a gray pickup truck that had no license plates. Minutes later, he radioed, quote, "Shots fired. I've been hit." The suspect was seen on security camera footage buying beer at a convenience store shortly before the shooting. He has not been formally named, but officials say they know who he is. They believe he is still in the area. They know he is armed and dangerous. And the sheriff also revealed the suspect is an illegal immigrant.
This suspect, unlike Ron, who immigrated to this country lawfully and legally to pursue his lifelong career of public safety, public service, and being a police officer, this suspect is in our country illegally. He doesn't belong here. He's a criminal. We will find him, we will arrest him, and we will bring him to justice.
President Trump tweeted shortly after that press conference, highlighting the manhunt for the suspect and saying, quote, "Time to get tough on border security. Build the wall." Officer Singh, as you heard the sheriff mention, was a legal immigrant from Fiji and apparently took extra English lessons to make himself better understood over the police radio. Those who worked with him say he loved being a police officer. He loved his family, and he was, quote, living the American dream. Brett.
Jonathan Hunt in Los Angeles. Jonathan, thank you. President Trump remains defiant over funding for a border wall as the crisis there along the border seems to be increasing. 2 migrant children have now died in U.S. custody, as we've reported, and so many people are crossing the border illegally. Immigration officials had to release hundreds of them in recent days. National correspondent William Lajeunesse reports from Los Angeles.
Catch and release. We're not releasing. For the many times President Trump vowed to end catch and release, he hasn't.
So de Guatemala.
I am from Guatemala. Thanks to God, we are almost free. We are here.
Free is a Greyhound bus station in El Paso, where this week ICE released more than 1,000 immigrants for lack of bed space and court mandates.
There's nothing else to say, but thank you very much. We are grateful.
In a statement, ICE blamed the courts and Congress for their inability to, quote, detain and remove families with no legal basis to remain in the U.S.
They have spent 8 to 10 days in cells. Now they've been released. What we've been doing as a community is to support them, giving them food, a place for them to stay at night.
Like El Paso, the surge of Central Americans is causing similar problems in the Rio Grande Valley. We got him, Q. Where the sector chief warned in October, apprehensions were outpacing the ability to process and hold them all.
This is going to require Congress to close the immigration loopholes, immigration reform, because this population is exponentially growing.
When you prosecute the parents for coming in illegally, which should happen, You have to take the children away.
The administration tried curbing illegal immigration by separating families, workplace enforcement, and limits on asylum seekers. But political opposition and court challenges left most efforts in limbo.
The Ninth Circuit has decided you can only detain a family up to 20 days, which is not time enough to see an immigration judge, which means they get released.
In the past, ICE held migrants long enough to see a judge and likely get deported. No longer. The number of families detained at the border jumped from 7,000 last November to 25,000 last month. Those numbers and the release of 1,000 migrants at the bus station tell Central American asylum seekers more than any tweet or news conference about the U.S. immigration system, which Secretary Nielsen now calls at a, quote, breaking point. She travels to El Paso Friday, Yuma Saturday, Brett, to meet with the Border Patrol.
William, thank you. The partial government shutdown is now nearly a week in, and both sides are digging in, and in the president's case, calling out Democrats on Twitter. Correspondent Ellison Barber is at the North Lawn of the White House with more on how the president is handling day 6 of the partial government shutdown. Good evening, Ellison.
Good evening, Brett. The president is once again trying to pressure Democrats to get them to reverse course and support funding for the border wall. Have the Democrats finally realized that we desperately need border security and a wall on the southern border? The president tweeted, "Do the Dems realize that most of the people not getting paid are Democrats?" There's no official record of political party affiliation when it comes to furloughed workers. President Trump not offering any evidence to back up his claim. The administration did not say exactly how many workers are furloughed, but there are estimates ranging from 345,000 to 800,000, impacting more than a dozen federal agencies and departments.
The folks are saying, can we have some drones? Can we have technology? Technology is bells and whistles. You have to have a wall. You have to have protection. But we have, in addition to drugs, in addition to human trafficking, in addition to mass numbers of illegals who are coming in, many of whom are criminals. How long is it going to take? When are they going to say that we need border security? When are the Democrats going to say?
The White House says they offered Democrats a number in between $5 billion and $1.3 billion. Sources tell Fox News the offer last week was roughly $2.5 billion for border security, including new fencing and other immigration priorities. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says the administration gave Democrats a reasonable, common sense solution 5 days ago. And so far, they have not received a single response. The president and his team stayed in Washington over Christmas, hoping to negotiate a deal that would stop the dangerous crisis on the border, protect American communities, and reopen the government. The Democrats decided to go home.
Will you accept $2 billion instead of $5 billion?
I'm not going to talk about it now. But they don't want to let us have strong borders. Only for one reason. You know why? Because I want it.
He claims Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi is the one preventing Democrats from making a deal, and he says it's because she's worried about potentially losing the House speakership, even though she was overwhelmingly nominated for it last month.
Chuck wants to have this done. I really believe that. He wants to have this done. But she's calling the shots, and she's calling them because she wants the votes.
A spokesperson for Pelosi responding to the latest White House statement with a statement of their own, saying this, quote, Democrats have offered Republicans 3 options to reopen government that all include funding for strong, sensible, and effective border security, but not the president's immoral, ineffective, and expensive wall. Brett?
Ellison Barber live on the North Lawn. Ellison, thank you. Well, it looks like a ghost town on Capitol Hill. The House and Senate both gavelled in today briefly. And as correspondent Peter Ducey reports, the next time either chamber will be in is Monday.
Senators still struggling with a solution to the shutdown came back from Christmas vacation today, and then they left after 3 minutes and 52 seconds. Lawmakers left the House after just 2 minutes and 42 seconds. Hallways were empty, and many office doors remained shut today, as most lawmakers weighed in on the shutdown from home or from vacation. And there's no rush to get back because the Majority Whip, Steve Scalise, sent this email blast. Members are advised that no votes are expected in the House this week.
In the last 48 hours, I would say that the needle has moved towards a very long shutdown, just because of the impasse that we're seeing and the unwillingness of Democrats to actually engage in meaningful dialogue.
Meadows and the conservative House Freedom Caucus pushed President Trump to reject any spending bill that didn't include a sizable down payment for a border wall. The $5 billion in wall money that easily passed the House disappears when Democrats take over next week. Now the clock is ticking for the GOP to take advantage of their majority.
5.7 in my mind was a compromise. It was a down payment on the wall, not fully funding the wall. And yet even numbers that have been reported, in the 2.5 to 2.7 range are not being accepted by Democrats. So what it tells us is the Democrats were never serious about border security.
In the Senate, where money for the border wall stalled, Democratic Whip Dick Durbin tweeted today, "No end in sight to the president's government shutdown. He's taken our government hostage over his outrageous demand for a $5 billion border wall that would be both wasteful and ineffective." But one of the few Democrats who showed up for work today thinks something else is driving the partial shutdown.
We ought to work at it until we get to an agreement where a majority say yes. And I think we had that. Until the president, went off his meds, and who the hell knows what happened.
Hundreds of thousands of federal workers waiting to find out how much longer their lives will be impacted by a shutdown might be surprised to see that the world's greatest deliberative body is currently one of Washington's quietest places. But it is, as rank and file Republicans and Democrats are trusting their leadership to take care of it. Brett?
I think there was a tumbleweed behind you. Peter, thank you. What do you think? Is there any chance of a deal on funding for a border wall? Let me know on Twitter at Brett Baier. You can use the hashtag special report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/BrettBaierSR. Another wild ride on Wall Street today. After falling 600 points, the Dow rallied, closing up 260 points. The S&P 500 also in the green today with a 21-point gain. The Nasdaq finishing ahead 25. So why the roller coaster today with the markets? Susan Lee of Fox Business Network joins us from New York. It's been up and down, Susan.
That's a good way to put it, Brett. Yeah, gains or losses, one thing's for sure, volatility. An 850-point swing to end higher after heavier losses in the session, and adding to yesterday's historic run with the biggest single-day points jump in the market's history. Investors dipping back in after some positive news on China trade and the Federal Reserve. Reports indicate that Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is open to a face-to-face meeting with President Trump, seen as a willingness to work out their differences, and this after the president's public disapproval of Powell and the central bank's rate hikes.
I think that if they did meet, that it would be a very favorable thing, that the two of them are very, great guys that would get along if they were to meet and talk things through. And the president loves to listen to reason, to arguments, to analysis, and Ed J does too.
Also, re-engagement on the trade front, with a U.S. delegation heading to Beijing in the first week of January to hopefully negotiate a trade deal between the world's two largest economies. Optimism that's also being echoed by America's small businesses.
It's sort of the reality check, as you're watching the markets right now, and to talk of a recession and, Wall Street, the hair on fire type of panic and all of that, is that, there's still a lot of great job opportunities out there. Small businesses remain, pretty optimistic, and they are looking at, decent growth going into 2019.
Despite today's gains, barring a huge rally the last few trading sessions of the year, markets are looking at their worst year since 2008, the global financial crisis, but continuing the second longest economic expansion on record and pulling back from ending the longest bull market run in history. Brett?
Susan, thanks. Up next, how our changing culture is changing our politics. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 19 in Cincinnati, where a disputed bill is now law, despite objections from Ohio Governor John Kasich. The law increases death benefits and insurance coverage for slain public safety officers' families, while also providing pay raises to Ohio elected officials. The Republican-led Ohio House overwhelmingly overrode the governor's veto today. In his veto, Governor Kasich said he would not give a pay raise without public debate. Fox 11 in Los Angeles with the story of a 14-year-old California girl who died this week after falling from a popular overlook near the Grand Canyon. Her family reported the girl missing during a visit to the national park. Her body was later found 700 feet below that overlook. And this is a live look at Chicago from our affiliate, Fox 32. One of the big stories there tonight, a new law coming in the new year that could affect some Illinois gun owners. The Firearms Restraining Order Act will allow family members or police to ask a judge to request temporarily removing guns from someone they think is a threat to themselves or others. Critics worry the new law will negatively impact more law-abiding gun owners than legitimate cases. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. A wicked winter storm is wreaking havoc across the Midwest and putting nearly 30 million people under flood watches in the southeast. Officials have shut down a stretch of Interstate 70 in western Kansas as a winter storm batters that area. Kansas is just one of several states where blizzard warnings were issued, with some areas bracing for up to 18 inches of snow in that region. The system already caused the cancellation of a college football game in Dallas last night, and several people aboard a flight over Texas were checked by doctors due to severe turbulence from that storm. Politics now. California is moving up its primary in hopes of making a bigger impact in the 2020 presidential election. Early voting in the state's primary will now overlap with the traditional early nominating contests in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. That could force the field of Democrats to navigate those states as well as California, which of course is an expensive state in which to compete. There's no question the makeup of the American family has changed over the years, and with that has come a shift in our politics, for better or worse. Correspondent Doug McElway with part 2 of his series on the changing population.
Tommy likes to be with his parents, and this evening is a little special, for it's the day for Tommy to receive his allowance.
If Tommy suddenly woke up today, he would be an aging baby boomer, receiving benefits from a Social Security trust fund that is more than $2 trillion in debt. He might be tending to his aches and pains with medical marijuana, now legal in 33 states. He might see his childhood friends are legally married, while almost half the mommies in the U.S. are not. And he would see the U.S. population increasing through immigration, because native-born parents are not reproducing enough to sustain their numbers, and immigrants willing to work for pay rates some Americans won't. Demographic realities are imposing wrenching change on the two political parties. The Democratic Party moving left. One poll showing millennials are more positive about socialism than they are about capitalism. Critics say that's no surprise for a party that has cultivated dependency.
I think the left, in many cases, likes people being attached to government programs, because then they think, well, we're the party of big government, and that way, if we have voters attached to government programs, they're going to stick with us.
That, while the hard lessons of socialism, 70 million dead in China, 20 million dead in the Soviet Union that happened during communism, are often neglected in colleges, now focused on social justice curricula.
We don't have to be balanced, because there's the evil corporation, there's the evil family, there's the evil government, there's the evil religion, so we're going to have kids for 4 years, so we can be biased.
The Republican Party, meanwhile, has been pushing towards populism. The GOP is also threatened by other changes. Young families saddled with college debt and uncertain over the prospect of at least 11.7 jobs before the age of 48 are moving to the suburbs less, buying fewer houses, and rejecting traditional values espoused by social conservatives.
Anything that comes across as harsh or draconian or directing people to have a certain kind of family appears to young people to be repressive and unnecessary.
Digital technology has presented other demographic obstacles, balkanizing citizens who can now choose media that affirms but doesn't challenge their views, while offering the parties new outreach.
Neither political party, Republicans or Democrats, can rely on these old strategies of let's just get the suburban vote out or let's just get the city vote out. The reality is voters are moving, and I think that's a good thing in terms of political parties having to take their message everywhere.
These demographic changes are hardly unique to the U.S. Tomorrow, some clues to where we might be headed from abroad. Brett?
Doug, thank you. Part 3 of the series tomorrow. Up next, Governor Jerry Brown, known by critics as Governor Moonbeam, is back in a controversial act to defy the Trump administration. First, beyond our borders tonight, Saudi Arabia's king is overhauling his government after fallout from the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Among the changes, removing Adel al-Jubeir as foreign minister. I spoke with al-Jubeir right after Khashoggi's death back in October. At the time, he called his murder a mistake done by a rogue operation. Al-Jubeir, we're told, will still serve in another still not specified capacity. Thousands of protesters in Taiwan rallied for the third time in a week today. They're demanding lower taxes and better handling of tax disputes. The protests are similar to France's Yellow Vest movement, but so far the Taiwanese protests have been peaceful. And more protests, this time in eastern Congo, over the delay to the presidential election there. Police fired live ammunition and tear gas into a crowd of more than 100 people to disperse them today. The delay to the election is being blamed on the deadly Ebola outbreak there. According to the Associated Press, that means more than 1 million votes may not be counted. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back. Russia is claiming they have a weapon that can defy any defense system, with President Vladimir Putin saying it now guarantees his country's security for decades to come. So where does that put U.S. safety, and is this missile real? Lucas Tomlinson with our report from the Pentagon.
One day after Christmas, the Russian military launched a new type of nuclear-capable hypersonic missile, which flew nearly 4,000 miles, successfully hitting its target near Kazakhstan. Russian President Vladimir Putin witnessed the test firsthand. He called the launch an excellent New Year's gift to his nation.
Новая система «Авангард».
The new Avangard missile system is invincible for today's and future air defense systems and missile defense systems. This is a big success and a big victory.
Putin said his new missile will be deployed next year and will put the United States in his crosshairs. Putin wasn't the only one watching the Russian missile. U.S. officials say American spy satellites tracked the launch from space. Hypersonic missiles can travel more than 20 times the speed of sound, a challenge for current U.S. missile defenses. A recent report from the National Defense Strategy Commission, a group of military experts and retired senior U.S. military officers, warned America has reached the point of a full-blown national security crisis in any future battles with Russia or China, due to years of Pentagon budget cuts during the Obama administration. The scathing report also said the U.S. military is falling behind in developing new weapons. With respect to hypersonics in particular, the United States finds itself trailing China and perhaps Russia as well. All this raises the possibility that America may find itself at a technological disadvantage in future conflicts. One of the report's authors said President Trump must continue to spend more on defense.
We have to do 5 things at once. We need to be able to continue the fight against terrorism like ISIS. We have to deter Iran and North Korea. We have to continue to counter Russian aggression. And of course, we have to deal with the pacing threat that we face in a resurgent China.
Officials here say the best defense against Russia and China remains the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Over 1,000 nuclear warheads deployed aboard silo submarines and bombers throughout the world. If any nation launched a missile against the United States, the response would be overwhelming. Brett.
Lucas Tomlinson, live at the Pentagon. Lucas, thanks. Attorneys for the Boston Marathon bomber want his death sentence thrown out. Lawyers for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev filed a brief today citing several issues, including the judge's refusal to move his case out of Boston, saying it made it impossible for him to get a fair trial. Tsarnaev and his older brother killed 3 people when they set off bombs near the finish line of the 2013 Boston Marathon. They also killed an officer while on the run from police. California's governor is planning one final act as the state's leader to defy the Trump administration's view on climate change. And as correspondent Claudia Cowan reports, the move is truly out of this world.
California Governor Jerry Brown recently closed out a global climate summit in San Francisco with an out-of-this-world idea.
We want to know what the hell's going on all over the world all the time. So we're going to launch our own satellite, our own damn satellite, to figure out where the pollution is and how we're going to end it.
Brown says space-based technology can pinpoint sources of methane, a potent greenhouse gas that contributes to global warming.
This initiative will enable us to spotlight the methane, the pollution, and then be able to be in a position to point out those who pollute and then develop the remedies to end it.
For Californians of a certain age, Brown's call to launch a satellite might sound like deja vu. In the 70s, during his first term as California's governor, Brown proposed a communication satellite to link state leaders in the event of an emergency. At the time, the idea was so out there, it helped earn Brown the nickname Governor Moonbeam. Ignition, liftoff. But in the 4 decades since, governments and private companies have launched numerous satellites, and supporters say it's fitting that Brown, now at 80, the nation's oldest governor, is ending his long political career owning the nickname he got while in his 30s.
He's now embracing the moniker Governor Moonbeam, but I think the time has come when the future has finally caught up with him. So he's right on the money, and this is a good thing for California.
California's newly elected governor agrees.
It's a great bookmark in its history. I just want to figure out what to name it.
The name, design, and other key details are still being worked out, but the plan is for a private company to build a satellite and launch it into space by 2021, with data being available in 2022. Brett?
Claudia Cowan in Sacramento. Claudia, thanks. President Trump's attorney is calling for an investigation into the special counsel, Robert Mueller. During an interview with Hill TV, Rudy Giuliani accused Mueller's office of destroying evidence related to the Russia probe. The Justice Department Inspector General reported earlier this month that it found large gaps in the preservation of text messages between FBI agent Peter Strzok and lawyer Lisa Page, who were part of the Russia investigation and exchanged anti-Trump texts. The report said a technical glitch was to blame for the loss of those messages. Giuliani says otherwise. Neither side is budging on the border wall, but is there a deal in the making? And the breaking news today, our panel weighs in on everything next.
We've already built a lot of wall. We're building a lot more, just through the normal budget. But we just gave out a contract that when it's all completed out, it'll be 115 miles. That's a lot. We're talking about 500 to 550 miles. And this will be just as one contract is 115. I'm going there. I assume you're coming with me on probably the end of January. We have a problem with the Democrats because Nancy Pelosi is calling the shots, not Chuck. And Chuck wants to have this done. I really believe that. He wants to have this done. But she's calling the shots, and she's calling them because she wants the votes.
Still trying to get the details of that contract on the border wall. The president talking about that and border security while traveling to see troops overseas, tweeting out, have the Democrats finally realized that we desperately need border security and a wall on the southern border, need to stop drugs, human trafficking, gang members, and criminals from coming into our country? Do the Dems realize that most of the people not getting paid are Democrats? Also tweeting out, there is right now a full-scale manhunt going on in California for an illegal immigrant accused of shooting and killing a police officer during a traffic stop. Time to get tough on border security and build the wall. That is in fact true. There is a manhunt underway. Sheriff's deputies say the suspect was seen on camera, security footage buying beer at a convenience store. They believe he is in fact an illegal immigrant, and he shot and killed an officer, Officer Singh, Wednesday after being pulled over in a gray pickup truck. That is all the backdrop to which this partial government shutdown continues. Let's bring in our panel. Jason Riley, Wall Street Journal columnist and senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. And Amy Walter, national editor for the Cook Political Report. Jason, your thoughts on the context here, on the big picture of all of this?
Well, the Democrats seem to be pushing for Trump to abandon any wall funding, which I think is very unrealistic. Brett, I think the smarter move would be for Democrats to offer some funding in return for something they want, such as amnesty for the Dreamers, who are very popular with people from both parties. In the short run, I don't think that this shutdown is really hurting the president. His supporters want it. He campaigned on it. They want him to fulfill a campaign promise, and I think Trump has become convinced that if he doesn't continue to push for this wall and show some progress on this front, he will hurt his standing with his base, and he could be right about that. I think the argument for him doing something now versus next year is that I think he has the stronger hand right now. As you mentioned earlier in the show, that $5 billion that was approved earlier this month, that goes kaput in January. And when Nancy Pelosi writes a new spending bill with her caucus, it will almost certainly contain less than $5 billion for a wall.
You know, Amy, this hunt for this illegal immigrant who shot and killed a police officer, the sheriff's office out there talking about the officer who was killed. Take a listen. Randy Richardson.
Yes, he was a police officer, but what needs to be known is that he was truly just a human being and an American patriot. Ron was not born in America. Ron was born in Fiji. He came to this country with one purpose, and that was to serve this country.
33-year-old Ron Singh killed in that shooting. You know, we've seen these incidents before, Amy, the Kate Steinle case out in California, that affected the broader picture on border security in one way or another. Is this one of those moments?
Well, it's a really horrible and tragic story. And you're right, Brett, to note that we have had a lot of stories like this. We've had a lot of discussion about the wall. We've had the caravan. We've had an election. We've had politicization of the wall throughout the last 2 years. And when you look, though, at opinions of the wall, they literally have not changed since the 2016 campaign. I went back and I looked at the Quinnipiac poll in November of 2016, support for the wall, 42%, opposition, 55%. 2 years later, now we're in December of 2018, support for the wall, 43%, and 54% disagree. So, with the idea of a wall. So the reality is that we have, over these last 2 years, we've not seen any minds changed on the opinion of the wall, despite all the other things that are going on around it. And instead, what we're getting is, instead of broadening of coalitions for either side, they're just hardening and deepening.
Molly.
And you're seeing that in this shutdown of the government. Both sides seem to think that they have the upper hand. I think that Democrats really believe that denying Trump a victory on border wall funding is absolutely key. They know that this was something he campaigned on. They know that this is something that does have a lot of support. 40+% of the American people wanting a wall is something that has a huge backing for it. And even more than a wall, there are greater concerns about border security, which I think is a much more compromised position that people on both left and right care deeply about. But at the same time, Trump thinks he's got a strong hand because 75% of the government is funded. He thinks that it shows that he cares about this issue, that he's willing to get credit for shutting down the government by that he cares so much that he's willing to go to that extent. And so there is this intractability in this fight. I do think that while the wall itself might be, with the numbers that Amy's talking about, concern about border security is a long-standing concern that goes back decades, and that there's a lot of frustration that the government has done so little to ensure the security of our borders.
You know, we saw Peter Doocy up on Capitol Hill, basically the only person up on Capitol Hill, Jason. It seemed like there were tumbleweeds going down the halls, and they'll be out until Monday. Meantime, the blame game continues, Republicans and Democrats. Take a listen.
The needle has moved towards a very long shutdown just because of the impasse that we're seeing and the unwillingness of Democrats to actually engage in meaningful dialogue.
Nobody likes the stress of the uncertainty. Public servants want to go to work. They don't want to be idled, and they certainly don't want to think this could go on for weeks. It is a great shame to this administration and to the outgoing Republican Congress that we've arrived at this kind of point.
Just the past minute, Jason, the president tweeting out, this isn't about the wall. Everybody knows that a wall will work perfectly. In Israel, the wall works 99.9%. This is only about the Dems not letting Donald Trump and the Republicans have a win. They may have the 10 Senate votes, but we have the issue, border security 2020. That was about a few minutes ago. Jason.
Yeah, I think the president is right that this is about the resistance not wanting to give him any quarter on any issue, including this issue. But I think that in the larger sense, the public is with the president in the sense of caring about border security much more than Democrats seem to care about border security. And we see this not only in their opposition to physical barriers, we see this in their attacks on ICE, abolish border enforcement of any kind, their support for sanctuary cities and so forth. They just are not, they don't look serious about border security of any kind, regardless of whether we're just talking about a wall.
Why didn't that work for the midterms? Why didn't it work in the districts that were suburbs outside of big cities? Why didn't the issue work? Because obviously the president was hitting it hard in the lead up to the midterms.
Well, I think there were other concerns that people had in their mind. And I think that, you know, the public did increase the Republican majority in the Senate while it turned control of the House over to Democrats. But I don't know that, I think Trump felt as if he didn't harp on this, the losses would have been even greater than they were. Now, that's difficult to prove, but I think that is his thinking on this issue. But his base is with him on this, Brett. In the short run, I really don't see him feeling a lot of pain on this. In the long run, perhaps if this goes on and on and on, then perhaps maybe you'll see some negative, a negative response to Trump on this issue, but not right now. I don't think it's been going on long enough. And we're so far away from 2020 that I don't think it's going to have an impact on that either.
Short answer, Amy, then Molly. Do we get a deal in the next days after Monday?
We're not going to get a deal until the new Congress is in place, and even then we're going to have a debate for a little while longer. But at some point, there are no winners in this. There are only losers. It's just a question of who looks less bad.
I actually think there is room for a win here in that Democrats can bring back DACA and talk about resolving that issue without having the courts settle everything, and you can get border security, and it seems like it would be a great time for people to get a little bit of what they want on both sides.
We shall see. Next up, looking ahead to 2020, who can compete in the next presidential election? We'll take a look.